So tonight we're going to take a look at the 1995 Nebula Award techno science fiction murder mystery thriller in Robert J. Sawyer's The Terminal Experiment. So what I would like to do is provide a bit of a plot overview, talk to what I liked, what I didn't like, put this novel to a memory test, make some recommendations, and I'll rank it on our Hugo and Nebula Award shed ladder that we've got going on here. We aim to rank all the Hugo and Nebula Award winning novels. So Peter Hobson was traumatized by an experience he had dissecting an organ donor during graduate school. So traumatized was he by this experience that he went out to invent the most sophisticated EEG machine, which he coined the Super EEG machine, and his sole purpose was to pinpoint the precise moment of death. He just didn't want to be in a situation where he was going to be dissected or buried or worse, unless he was absolutely sure he was dead. And in making this machine, he's set out to have a couple of terminal ill patients under his care wear this particular headpiece to precisely pinpoint the radio waves, the electrical activity happening in the patient's mind. And what he discovered is that during death, there was some electrical activity in the brain that started on one side of the brain, made its way through to the other side of the brain, and appeared to exit the brain. And he thought, oh, that's rather interesting what we're seeing here. And he had several different patients, and what he realized is that there is something that happens once we die. There is some kind of electrical, wave that seems to be exiting our brain, which sort of points to something more than death being final. Peter has a friend called Saka. Saka is of the Muslim faith, and he sort of immediately looks at this and goes, hey, this is proof of an afterlife. That's the soul leaving your body. Peter's sort of a bit more skeptical, and he doesn't quite want to admit that this looks like a soul. But the world at large has sort of seen this as, yes, this is absolute proof of life after death. And there's a whole lot of really interesting little extracts in the novel from television shows, from newspaper clippings, as to how the world reacts on the onset of this fantastic, piece of equipment that Peter's built here, because it sort of does indicate that there is some kind of life after death. So Peter is really intrigued by the concept of afterlife post his invention. So much so that he has a chat with Saka, his friend, who he was working for this artificial intelligence firm that is doing some really, really fantastic work when it comes to artificial intelligence. And Peter has this idea that, hey, I created this mind map thing that will look at all the neurons that are firing in my head, and it could make a complete replica of my brain. And Saka says, hey, we've got the technology now where we can edit and splice and store this information digitally into our computer systems. So they set out to do this to really test the theory of immortality. And in doing so, they create 3 different instances of Peter's mind. One is a test subject, which is basically Peter's mind mapping without any modifications at all. So it's as realistic as Peter could be. The other one is one they nicknamed Spirit. And Spirit has been edited to remove any biological thoughts at all. So he's purely a spirit form. There's no concept of biology or a body, no carnal feelings at all. He's purely a spirit form. And I wanted to sort of understand what that is. So they've edited out anything that would sort of talk to any biological constraints. The other one they've nicknamed Albatross. I'm pretty sure that was the name, Albatross. And Albatross is basically this entity that has been edited to remove any fear of aging, any fear of death, any fear of aging. So he's basically immortal. And those 3 are being kept in this computer simulation to really understand how would immortality sort of affect these kind of beings. But so when people who have wronged Peter in real life are murdered or die under mysterious circumstances, it doesn't take long for the focus to shift to the Sims. So look, I found it to be a rather quick and enjoyable read. It's just over 300 pages, 320 pages, but I found it to run pretty quickly. I did like the concept of the afterlife that the novel talks. I like the questions asked, right? Is there really life after death? And if there was life after death, what would those beings look like if they had no fear of death, if there was no fear of aging, if there was no fear, or we were purely intellect, right? So I did like the concept that was explored in the novel. I thought it would make a really good, entertaining movie, to be honest. I didn't think that writing was as strong as it possibly could be, but I'll talk to that in a little bit more in a moment. I did enjoy how Peter portrayed society would react to something like this, right? To some kind of evidence that there is life after death. I don't think it was necessarily bulletproof. I think the world would be a lot more divided and a lot more skeptical than they seem to be in the novel. In at least the newspaper clippings and the television, radio sort of presentation snippets that were presented in the book. I thought they sort of jumped to the conclusion that yes, this is a sign there is life after death. I think in reality, people would be a lot more skeptical. At least that's been my experience when talking to people about the potential of life after death, right? So I found people to be rather skeptical and at least a lot more 50-50 than what we found in the book here. So I did like the concept of, you being able to make a digital copy of your mind and store it on a computer system. It's not new. I've seen it countless times in science fiction, but I always really do enjoy that concept, right? The other thing that I found interesting in the novel as well is that humans have, found a way to use nanotechnology to basically build an indestructible body. So, we see some of the main protagonists in the books getting shot in the head and still being able to survive because of nanotechnology in the book. So I found that rather interesting as well. So some of the things that I didn't really enjoy in the novel was the technology elements themselves. I just feel like it just hasn't aged well, which is rather interesting because I read this book when it came out in 95. I think it might have been 96 or 97 when I read this particular novel the first time round. And I remember at the time, we look at the year set, the novel was set in the year 2010. So it wasn't a not too distant future back then, right? And I remember reading it at the time thinking, yeah, maybe, maybe we will have PCMCIA cards that will have gigs of RAM, right? And we may have this internet thing that can transfer 35 gigs worth of data, which would be regarded as absolutely astronomical amounts of data, right? I felt like that was potential in 1995 when I read it, but it just hasn't dated well, right? Some of the technology that is brought up in the book that was supposed to be prevalent in 2010 was almost obsolete by that stage, right? There was very few people using PCMCIA cards in 2010. I think also the way the brain was stored, and I won't talk into some of the aspects of the internet and what these entities did there as to not to spoil some of the plot. But yeah, I just found the technology just didn't age well, which is a bit of a shame and a bit of a gambit you take when you're referring to real technologies in a not too distant future and expecting them to be something other than what they ultimately became. Look, who's to know? Robert may have hit the nail right on the head and his predictions may have been right, but unfortunately they were just far from the mark. So yeah, it makes it for a bit of a dated reading experience for me. The other thing that I think was not really realistic is the science in it, right? The actual physical science of capturing the brainwaves. I'm no neuroscientist, but the little that I do know, I looked at that and I thought, yeah, well, I don't know how much of that personality and your memories will be contained in your neuromappings, right? Look, I'm no neuroscientist, and I would love for someone to watch this video in 100 years and say, hey, didn't that number get that completely wrong? And that's exactly how we can replicate human brains. I don't think so, and I think the science doesn't really hold up there as well. So look, I did enjoy it. As far as recommendations, I think if you like techno murder mystery novels, well, this is really what you're getting in Robert J. Sawyer's The Terminal Experiment. It is a murder mystery, and I was entertained. I did enjoy reading it through. Like I said, it's a really fast read. It does sort of remind me of the likes of John Scalzi. So I don't know, there's a lot that reminds me of John Scalzi in Robert J. Sawyer. It is a murder science fiction murder mystery novel, and I enjoyed it throughout. I don't think it was a heavy read. I don't think it really asked too many serious questions. I did like the concept of the afterlife, but And even though it was a serious concept, I don't think it was entirely well done, right? I don't think it was really thought provoking in that sense. And I can't really talk to why that is without giving spoilers away. But look, it was an enjoyable book, so I would recommend it to anyone who likes murder science fiction novels. So overall, look, it was a fun, enjoyable read. I don't have too many qualms about recommending it. It was a worthy Nebula award-winning novel in my mind. I thought the characters were okay. They weren't extremely well developed or deep, but they had enough to keep me entertained. Hey, we've got to rank it on our Hugo and Nebula award-winning ladder, which is not getting any easier. So how about I set up and we get straight to it? So back to the ladder and ranking tonight's 1995 Nebula award-winning novel in Robert J. Sawyer's The Terminal Experiment. So during my review, I mentioned that Robert's writing reminds me a lot of John Scalzi's writing. So I think we're going to go straight to Red Shirts, which is at the bottom of the A-sides at the moment. So just a real quick recap. We got ascending to descending order from A to B, from left to right, of all the Hugo and Nebula award-winning novels that I've read to date. So yeah, I'm going to start with the bottom of the A-side in John Scalzi's The Red Shirts, because Scalzi's writing does remind me of Robert J. Sawyer's writing, especially in this particular novel. But I'd have to say, when it comes to the memory test, which I didn't mention in my review, I read this book, like I said, in 96, 97 time frame, and there was really not much I could remember at all. I remember, the concept of murder in the afterlife. But that was pretty much it. So whenever someone mentioned Robert J. Sawyer, I thought, yeah, that's the novel, that Terminal Experiment, where some guy does something with his brain and someone dies and somehow there's murder in the afterlife, right? And that was pretty much all I could remember of the novel, right? Couldn't remember the characters, couldn't remember much of the plot either. So when I look at the Sci-Fi Shed Ladder, and one of the inputs that I use in ranking these books is how memorable was that novel, I'd have to say that there are elements in Red Shirts that I remembered a lot more than I do Robert J. Sawyer's The Terminal Experiments. So I can't put it above Red Shirts, and I definitely cannot put it above Flowers for Algernon, one of my all-time favorite novels. If you want to understand why I'm ranking Flowers where it is, I highly recommend you go and check out the video review of Flowers for Algernon as to some of the reasoning I had that. But even considering everything I said in my review for Flowers, I definitely can't rank it above Flowers for Algernon. Nor can I rank it above Rite of Passage. I thought Rite of Passage was just a wonderful coming-of-age novel, and I'm really finding it difficult to rank Robert J. Sawyer's The Terminal Experiment above Rite of Passage. So I think it's going to be somewhere between Startide Rising and Babel 17. Now, Startide Rising, I mentioned, has a really strong concept. I really enjoyed the concept, but I didn't care much for the plot, and I didn't really care much for the flying dolphins, right? But I thought the uplift, the process of uplift was a really wonderful concept. I really enjoyed that concept and the story around that. And like I mentioned in my last review, I'm currently reading The Uplift War, which will be coming up in a couple of weeks, I suspect, which I thought was just another really strong conceptual piece of work as well. So as much as I didn't really care for the flying dolphins, I thought the concept was really strong. And unfortunately, the concept in Terminal Experiment for me felt a little bit dated, so I can't put it above Startide Rising. But I am going to put it. Oh, I nearly said it. I said I am going to put it above Babel 17. But again, concept. Babel 17 was a much more memorable novel. It was a much more stronger concept in that, language being used as a weapon. Yeah, so I'm going to say that Terminal Experiment is just going to sit above Relate the Sweet Bird Sang. And as much as I liked Relate the Sweet Bird Sang, I think overall I enjoyed the murder science fiction, thriller more than I did Relate the Sweet Bird Sang. As much as I really did enjoy Relate the Sweet Bird Sang. But yeah, I think I'm going to give Robert J. Sawyer's The Terminal Experiment the slight edge. Yeah, I'm just looking at the rest of them. It's a tough one, this one. It's somewhere here, right? And at the moment, I'm going to say The Terminal Experiment does not beat does not beat Relate the Speedbird Saying. I'm going to rank it. Man, this is really a tough one. Ancillary Justice, 2014 Hugo and Nebula award-winning novel. Is The Terminal Experiment better than Ancillary Justice? And I'm going to say no again, right? I think conceptually, Ancillary Justice was a really good book. I did enjoy the concept of that artificial intelligence spaceship having thousands of ancillaries made of these human subjects who have had their mind wiped and their, the AI downloaded onto them. And it was a strong concept. I did remember the concept during my review, like I said, which I really didn't remember as much. Admittedly, The Terminal Experiment I read 10 years earlier than I did Ancillary Justice. But, we're talking about your mind being cloned and digitally uploaded to a computer and a murder mystery to boot. Is that a really strong concept? It's an enjoyable concept, and that's what I'm saying. I really enjoyed the novel, but I don't think it's extraordinary in any way, right? And is it better than Quantum Rose? Yeah, I think it is. I think that one's pretty straightforward for me. Yeah, look, that was a little bit tougher than I anticipated. Like I knew it was going to be somewhere on the B side. I wanted to start with John Scalzi, but as I worked through my logic, it sort of makes sense that it is towards the bottom edge. The characters are not that greatly defined. The concept, as enjoyable as it is, not that great. I do enjoy a murder mystery novel, and that's probably saying why The Demolished Man sits where it does, which is not far off the list, right? It's a pretty decent novel because I do enjoy that murder mystery novel. But yeah, I think the plot was okay. It was pretty transparent for me in the end what happened, and I won't give spoilers, but there is a mystery component there to who's killing these people, and for me I guessed it right from the onset. So yeah, the plot was good. It was an enjoyable read. I'd love to see it on the big screen, but I think as a novel, I'm happy with that where that sits. Hey, they're not getting any easier. Absolutely not getting any easier. But I've loved spending my time with you this evening, racking my brain out on the science fiction sci-fi shed ladder. And I hope you can join me next time when we debate and we ponder and we struggle ranking another great novel on our sci-fi shed ladder. Thank you for joining me. I'll see you next time in the shed.